happens, who at that time were saying, look, we've got these numbers of houses which will double the size of Liscard. And it's terrible. We're being surrounded by these estates and the schools can't cope. And I said to them, well, don't worry about the number too much, but Cornwall's growing. We know that people are living longer than before, therefore children are being priced out of homes. We do actually need to deliver more homes. Let's just take it that there will be some growth. And whether it's 20 years or 30 years or 50 years or 100 years, sooner or later, probably Liscard will grow by a couple of thousand homes or whatever it was. Let's imagine it the other way around. Let's think, if we think that in 50 years, but it might be 20 years and it might be 100 years, we're not going to worry about that. But we think there's going to be change and growth. What if I took all of those and used them to fund an amazing park? And the houses could be the other side of it. And it'd be like Edinburgh New Town. There might be a new town around the park. And there would be new schools and shops, but also it would support the town centre. And you had the choice to really think about a long-term vision of what this place might look like in the future. Now, you might not want change, but you can see changes coming. So you do that change. And then it's not which developer comes forward with a housing estate and do we accept it or not. It's does this fit with this vision of where we'll be in the long run? And if you don't want that, well, actually, why don't we build it over the hill and out of the way and create a new Liscard, which is the Garden Village and Garden Town programme, which doesn't impact lots of people and actually is designed right from the word go as a 21st century sustainable community. And maybe that's a better choice than I talked about ringing all these market towns with housing estates, which aren't sustainable because nobody walks into town from them. They're all in cars. They've got no pub. They've got no shop. They're not places. They're just dormitories. And they donut historic places and wreck them. And actually, of course, they jam up the roads because the children have to be driven across town to the school and driven across town to work, and nothing's on your doorstep. So it's all cars. So that was the vision. But all of it is, I think, about having a really strong idea of change is happening and growth is probably happening. Let's stop arguing about whether it's 5, 10 or 15 years, because that misleads us completely. It's not about whether we need an estate of 200 on the edge of Liscard today. It's actually about what is Cornwall like in 50 or 100 years time? And what is St Ives like, and what's Truro like, and what is Portlow like, and what is Liscard like, and what is Dodwells like? And given that we got to make these things, we've got to accommodate change, if you like. We've got to see growth happening. We can't stop people moving in. All of those, can't stop people having babies. How will we do that in a really visionary way? And that's why I say you can't take the market town separate from the villages. Because if you don't build in the villages, you build on the edge of the market town. If you don't build on the edge of the market town, you build, or do you? Actually, if you take a really strong vision, you might do things very differently. And you certainly wouldn't do it by piecemeal estate development, which is the worst kind of planning. And yet it's exactly what's happened around both our villages and our towns.
Matthew, thank you. These are really interesting thoughts. And I think you're saying what I wish had been in my mind before you said it. I think it might have been, but I just hadn't found it. I'm going to bring Councillor Mike McLenning forward.
Good afternoon, Matthew. I look after St Stephen Brannock division, which you probably know quite well.
I know very well, yeah.
My view is I've been here 14 years in Cornwall, and funny enough, when you mentioned about the book distributors, I've been in with magazines circulating all my life. What I can't get my head around is neighbourhood plans. I wasn't here on a local plan, and when we get told the salaries are so low here and there's unemployment's high, who's actually buying all these houses? Because not everybody's rushing down from London and wherever, because I would think those who've got money, the ones you described, will look at the estate agents and find some of the nicer properties. They probably don't want to live on estates if they've got some money. So if young couples are able to afford to buy somewhere, they're probably going to suffer to be able to start a family. So I'm a non-exec on Cornwall Housing, and we obviously need more social housing. As you know, in my area, Cornwall Housing doesn't exist. I don't get any Cornwall Housing. It's all beg and borrow from housing associations. So that whole subject concerns me because I can't see, no one's given me an actual answers all the years I've been in the council and I brought this question up, how that's going to happen and be solved, or if it can be solved. Secondly, I worked from home since 1990 with publishers, and when I moved down here, you mentioned about there's 8,000 micro businesses. For them to grow, they're not all going to need to take on a staff, are they? They're not all going to have to say +1 or +2, because I could manage all my 24 clients on my own thanks to a laptop and doing things how I set my work schedules. So we're told again the jobs are going to, there's a 12,000, 13,000 jobs going because of COVID, and they want to put more jobs on the table before that happens. So I think, and we've had this recovery for Cornwall discussions down at the council, and I'm real doubting Thomas that I can't see anything that's, you always use the word sustainable, that's going to happen to make things an improvement. I'm not a great fan of the market towns. You know, you only got to look at Milton Keynes and Welwyn Garden City, you know, like the end of the world, seeing those cows standing there. But I'm concerned. You're explain things very detailed, and you know your stuff. I give you all the respect for that. But I haven't really understood anywhere along the road since I've been here where they're really finding the solution to the bottom line problems. You're going to work upwards. People, to get a mortgage, need to have a good job. There's no such thing as security now in jobs. That's gone out the window. So the whole game of it all, and the three you say have to combine, I agree with that, but I can't see any real answer on that. Doubting Thomas.
Okay, well, so quite a lot of stuff there, and I'll just try and pick some of it. As I talk to communities right around the country, one of the things that's often said is, so what, you know, what you're saying we need more homes, but who are these for, and what's driving up the price? The absolute core of it applies to every community. So 80–90% of people only move within 10 miles of where they currently live. So although Cornwall is a place which people move into, some of it retirement, some of it families. So you have two groups that move in and one group moves out. 20-somethings move out, go and study, don't work in the city, whatever. They quite often come back when they've got families, or there are people who move here for family reasons. But most of the driver for the need is actually local driver, and it's very simple, which is we're living a lot longer than we used to. And the 1960s baby boom is moving into retirement at the same time as we've had a second baby boom about a decade ago. So we had the most children being born in sort of 2007-8 as we'd had in any year since 1970. So you've got the old baby boom coming into retirement and living much longer. So you've got a doubling in the number of 85-year-olds between 2010 and 2035, and a doubling of the number of 65-year-olds, which is between 2010 and 2050, at the same time as you've got the baby boom of the early 2000s starting to move out of home and wanting places of their own. And the older generation have capital, because they got houses when houses were relatively affordable. So they can afford, and they can move. If you move out of London, you know, something that was not worth very much a few years ago is worth £1.5 million in Lambeth, for goodness sake, let alone Islington or Hampstead or something. So they will move out with capital, and it's the younger generation who don't. And we see very direct impacts of that, in that you've seen an increase in the hundreds of thousands of under 40-year-olds living with their parents, and their parents say they don't want them there, and the under 40s say they don't want to be there, but they can't afford to move out. But the other is buy to let, where people with capital buy something to rent to people in their 20s and 30s, usually multiple occupancy, And of course, what they do is price out young families, because if you're a mum and dad with a little baby on a low income, you can't pay as much rent as 3 young professionals in the same little terrace cottage. So it's essentially an increase in the population, and that drives up prices because as interest rates have fallen, people have been able to afford a bigger mortgage, and there's a competition for houses because there aren't enough. And that's true throughout Cornwall. In the places like you and I represent and live in, it's just the tail end of that. So the houses that have been built here in Roach are people like nurses, teachers, because they can't afford to live in Truro, and they'll commute into the hospital or whatever. So people end up, depending on the price of the community, where it is. I would just caution about the overemphasis on affordable, at least in the poorer communities. So when we did the work on the Carclays Garden Village, I saw councillors endlessly saying what we want is affordable homes. And absolutely, part of it needs to be affordable, mixed community, all prices. But actually, affordable for a young medic is as important as for somebody in social deprivation, but they probably aren't eligible for an affordable home. So I want it on the whole range. But for the poorer communities of the China Clay, actually what I mostly want to do is attract the kind of entrepreneurialism that you'll get elsewhere. So Carclays, to me, the most important thing about it is that we're effectively offering something to people who might otherwise buy an old farmhouse, where they can actually set up a business like you do and I do. And yes, you might not employ someone to work with you. Maybe I will or I won't. But actually quite a lot of people, if they're doing quite well with their business, might take on someone if it doesn't mean changing their lifestyle, which is why I say it's important to do that. But I think we can deliver that. Now, where do jobs come from? And the short answer is they don't come from attracting a Vodafone head office or a Nortel or whatever. They come from these little micro businesses. And actually, Cornwall is fantastically entrepreneurial. That it's already there. One of the problems is because we're a low-income economy, actually, it's almost that all those micro businesses competing with each other to do building work and all the rest of it actually depress the value. So what we need is people who can afford to pay a bit more for it, frankly. So to me, the key with the rural economy is that mixed, vibrant economy. If you go, sorry, I go all the way up to this, but if you go back to the 1940s when they introduced the Planning Act, there were 2 reports. There's the one that basically introduced planning, which was all about saying we've got to protect our rural areas and our coastlines and our towns from unregulated development. And effectively what happened was nationalising the right to develop. You could only do it with permission. But in particular, it was about protecting rural areas because, you know, every bit of coastline was getting a bungalow built on it. You know, people, because as people could suddenly move around more easily and the private car was starting to happen and so on, all of this was, you was just seeing unregulated development and bungalows being built everywhere. So that was what it was primarily on. And for rural areas, there was this idea that rural development should only be for rural things, partly to protect agriculture, because post-war they wanted to be able to supply food to the country, but partly to protect the countryside. And there was a minority report that was written. It said, if you only allow rural, quote unquote, business to happen in the countryside, if you freeze everything else from happening, you'll condemn it to get poorer and poorer because those wages are low. And if you never allow things to happen that have higher wages, what you'll see is the rural areas get poorer and poorer. But the housing will still be popular, so it will get more expensive. And that, of course, is exactly what happened. So the people who did the work of the countryside got priced out of it. And the people who'd campaigned to protect the countryside in the CPRE and so on moved into it, knowing that it was protected and they could have a lovely home with no threat of development. So I think you need to rebalance that. But the great thing about the age of the internet is that you and I can work in the village. You know, villages can become working places again. And if we're working in the village, we're more like, I popped down to the shop to the co-op for my coffee just now. That's keeping that business going. Whereas if the village was dead during the day, the shop would close.
You don't know, Matthew, you must have missed Coombe then when you were canvassing. We haven't got traffic, we haven't got anything or a post office here in Coombe. But my
post office, you used to have a post office. I used to go in it. Yeah.
Well, you've been going a long time then. My son, for 3 months, has now moved down to live with us. So he's one of the under 40s that can't afford to live in London and works from home. We've been discussing the horrible consultants this morning, but he's a consultant for PA Consult. He's at Deloitte. But I hear what you say. You've helped me quite a bit with your answers there. But which I'm going to bring up this week when we have a discussion on home choice. My weekend was open surgery, my phone number. People can't getting towards the stage of being homeless. They can't find anywhere. They can't afford to rent privately, and there's nothing around. So we seem to be too slow. I mean, you can see half your face at the moment. We seem too slow. That's better. We seem to be too slow down here at overcoming that problem. And it's not just my area. Jane could say the same, and Peter. There's a hell of a problem on solving, we want to call it social housing or affordable housing, that's not been dealt with. You know, they might say they've built 1,000 homes and it's, we're the #1 in the country. I'm not being political at all because I'm not that. But something's wrong because we're not solving the problems, because I have a motto, the here and now as well.
I mean, broadly speaking, we've been building nationally about 100,000 too few homes every year. So we're around 1 million homes down. And in that period of time, you've had an increase of 750,000 in the number of under 40s living with their parents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually measurable. It's that clear. And then you've got the boom in buy-to-let, which, as I said, the young professionals living together. The thing that's is a driver in Cornwall, which is a particular issue, and it's not just Cornwall, but we're a good example of it in rural communities, is this is a popular and attractive place to live. So there is people moving down here, which exacerbates the issue that I told you about, which is the population demographic of people living older. I mean, you know, if we all keel over, our children will have plenty of houses. So, but it exacerbates it. But there's another issue, which is that there is this tendency to think that there's only two bits of the market. There's kind of expensive private houses, and then there's the social affordable. And as you get more people needing homes, you need to do more and more and more and more and more social affordable. Actually, most people can afford bricks and mortar. It's the cost of the land they can't afford, and it's because we've not made enough available. But there is an extra problem in Cornwall, which is the holiday rental market. So you've got the social rented, and you've got the market to buy. What we've not had here is this response of, if you like, the buy-to-let, which is the private rented. So your son's option for finding something to rent, given he's not going to get social housing because he won't tick the boxes for that in all probability, from what you said, is next to zero, because he probably hasn't got the capital to buy something, but he hasn't got the eligibility for the affordable. So one of the things that I think we should be encouraging is quality private rental. And that's not just apartments, that's actually houses. I work with the developer in Oxfordshire, and they're doing a new community, Upper Hayford, in Oxfordshire. And they do something very unusual for a developer, which is that they do a lot of rented. They do their own social rented, they do the open market, but they also do private rented. And they said that they found that there was this myth that there isn't a demand for private rented in the rural communities. It's sort of thought of as an urban flats thing. But actually, of course, there's lots of people who can't afford the capital, or maybe are trying to save a bit, but could rent. But there's nothing for them, because in other parts of the country, people would much prefer to do a private rental than a social rental, if you like. There's an opportunity, but here it's in the holiday market, because you'll get much more money out of the holiday market than you will by renting long term. So you get the winter let phenomenon. And I do think that there's an important role for the council in thinking about the full range of tenancies and the full range of prices, because a doctor who will be eligible for social housing is just as important, and actually they may not be able to afford either. What is affordable? It's affordable for what I can afford. I need an affordable home. I can afford it more than other people can afford, but it still needs to be affordable.
Matthew, that's fascinating. Thank you. And it's one of the things that Cornwall Council are attempting to address, of course, through the Treveth investment and the private rented scheme that they're working on. I'm desperate to wrap this up within a very few moments.
As I've got you, can I say one last thing? Just with a different hat. You're talking about employment. Cornwall I chair it, so I've got a complete interest, but I chair Tensa, which is the ground source heat pump company that manufactures down between Falmouth and Truro at the old Mount Wellington mine, and also consultancy installs. They're set up to do primarily actually social housing retrofit, and they've done it in hundreds and hundreds of homes around the country using shared ground arrays. So you put lots of little heat pumps in people's houses, like as if you had a gas boiler connected to a shared ground array as if it's the gas main. Cornwall's hardly done any, and that company is half the UK market. I mean, it's easily the market leader. LNG's but Cornwall's, ironically, despite the fact both climate and geology is ideal, does very little of it. And one of the reasons is that Cornwall's done a lot on what you call the moonshots. So deep geothermal that may or may not work, wave hubs that actually haven't yet come off, but hopefully will. But ground source is kind of boring, but it is slightly bizarre because it's the lowest carbon, zero carbon ready, and it's easily the cheapest for the people in it. And the great thing is it's jobs. So Cornwall's got the only UK manufacturer in Cornwall, and you can only put these things in by basically plumbers and people doing diggers and so on, who are all local jobs. So it's kind of there, and it's very frustrating that we've done hundreds in tower blocks in Enfield and Croydon, and Bristol has adopted it as their standard heating strategy, and yet the company that's the UK market leader in Cornwall gets virtually no business here in the county, despite your climate change policy. And it's a straightforward jobs delivery, and it's a homes quality of homes thing. So anyway, there you go. Details. I've taken the opportunity to
we get details.
But Matthew and the panel and our staff that are here, I personally have to make an apology. I'm going to have to leave at 1 o'clock because I've got another meeting that I'm chairing, and there's another group of people already together in the next meeting for me. So Matthew, we've got 4 minutes in which to try and wrap it up with you. I do want to thank you very much for not using the words place shaping in this, so well done. But could we have your recommendations, if that's possible, please?
I think the single biggest recommendation is that one about taking a 50-year vision combined with the social, economic and environmental together, and recognizing that communities only work if you balance those 3 things really well. That's actually everything else then flows from it. That's it. I have had it flagged that because I'm on South West Water, you have got the beach cleanup and all the rest of it, but that's just part of the same picture. And yet what we do with planning is mostly look so short term. Do we allow this estate to happen? Do we allow this business to happen? What do we do about the high street today? That long vision delivers it. With St Austell, I'm helping to think about moving the offices into the centre of St Austell, support the retail offer. But I've suggested that the council buy and remove the old Woolworth building to create a new town square to link 4th Street and White River Place, because you could, at tiny cost, transform that town centre. But again, it might not be that moving the offices in and doing that, buying that building and just knocking it down and creating a square looks like economic value short term. Take a 50-year vision. Do you want it to be an abandoned town centre that no longer functions? The value of taking that, what do we want it to be? Well, in that case, this is what we can do to make that happen, as apart from this is this year's budget or this is this year's housing estate proposal.
Brilliant. Okay, you gave us 2 recommendations, and I want to encourage you to give us a third. I don't know if you want to or not, but one of the big points you made was about allowing employment to take place in villages by being a bit more generous with our view of permissions and applications. Could that be a third? Is that up there to be that third one?
Yes, although I think I would focus it above all else in we are shifting very rapidly to greater and greater levels of home working. So it's supporting home working, but also in supporting home workers to become employers, and that needs spaces. So the way I put it to a planning officer a long time ago is you refuse the office extension to the house, but you allow the ballroom. The snooker room. It ought to be the other way around. You don't really need a snooker room, but if you can get a couple of people extra working in the village, that's going to support the shop, the school, the economy, and the sustainability of place.
Okay, perfect. Well, if it's okay with the panel, I'd like to wrap it up now. I'm quite happy to leave the meeting and for you to carry on chatting, but I do have to go on to my next.
Go for 1 o'clock. Actually, I've got.
Okay, so Matthew, we're incredibly grateful to you. It's been really fascinating listening to you, and incredibly valuable to us to actually understand the direction that you're coming from. And I think this actually does provide us with quite a strong rudder on some of the direction that we're going with some of our thinking. So I'm incredibly grateful to you for that, and we do appreciate your time. Time is money, and we are.
I wish. I wish.
Matthew, can I write you with some questions? Matthew, is it all right to write to you with some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Matthew, we've done the thanks to you. Thank you to the panel of Jane and Mike, and thank you to Lynn and David as well. And with that, it's 1 o'clock, and we've done. Lynn, I'm afraid we haven't got time for a wrap up. Maybe you want to contact me later or something. We can do it by email. I'm happy to do that.
And thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've got